Round 7 of the Premier League is coming up this weekend, and it's time to preview and predict every single game of this game week. Starting off with the Friday game of Bournemouth taking on Fulham at home. And I actually expect this to be quite a comfortable win for Bournemouth. I just hold them as such better team than Fulham, especially after that dreadful performance from Fulham against Aston Villa. Even though Aston Villa are supposed to be good, we all know how poor they've been in the start of this season, and to go away and lose to them 3-1 as well. That's everything else but impressive. And I do think even though Bournemouth got a draw last week against Leeds, obviously, I think that they're so much better on the ball than Fulham. And Fulham going away, they often sit back and counter, and that just makes for a nightmare matchup against Bournemouth. So my prediction is gonna be a 3-1 Bournemouth win. Next up, we have our first Saturday game, and it's Leeds taking on Tottenham at home. And although Tottenham will be huge favorites going into this game, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Leeds manages to get something out of this one. Like I mentioned, Leeds managed to get a draw last week at home against Bournemouth. And as we all know, Bournemouth beat Tottenham previously this season. And I just think that Leeds are the kind of team that Tottenham in some weird way can struggle against. Of course, they will probably win now Tottenham 5-0 or something since I said this. But Leeds at home and Ellen Road with the fans going as well, I wouldn't be surprised if they get something out of this game. And I'm actually going to predict a 2-1 Leeds United victory here. Moving on to a London derby, we have Arsenal, the biggest favourite of the entire game week here, taking on West Ham United, who of course managed to pick up a point last week, or actually this week on Monday, against Everton away. And that's pretty impressive actually. And as we all know, Graham Potter finally got sacked, as I predicted, and Nuno Espirito Santos coming in to replace him, which I think is an interesting appointment, to say the least. Of course, Nuno has been successful previously in the Premier League, but will his tactics suit the squad that West Ham have? I'm not too sure. It's, yeah, only time will tell, to be honest. But Arsenal keep looking really decent. Obviously, Arsenal should be a huge favorite going into this game, and I would be expecting Arsenal to pick up a win here, of course, as most people. Last time out, they got this win against Newcastle in like the 89th minute or something, but that's one of their strength. They manage to win games even though they're tight. They still manage to go out and get it done, and the quality, I just think it's too much for West Ham in this game, so I'm going to predict a 3-0 Arsenal win. Moving on to another huge favorite this game week, but one that I don't think is justified. It's Manchester United as they take on Sunderland at home at Old Trafford. And I honestly predict Sunderland to win this one. I mean, I'm just been fascinated by both teams, to be honest, but especially Sunderland in a good way this season. If you look at their form here and didn't see the name Sunderland, you would expect this to be a team like Chelsea or maybe Spurs. Their form is brilliant. And Manchester United, I'm just in a lack of words when it comes to them. I mean, what can you say other than it's just amazing that Ruben Amorim keeps playing Bruno Fernandes in midfield week in, week out, even though it doesn't seem to work at all. And of course, the attack, if this one starts with Cunha, Sesko, and Mbuemo, it is really good. But this is not Football Manager. It's not just a good attack that you need to win a football game. You need an entire team. And if you don't prioritize your midfield, especially, you don't stand a chance even against the newly promoted side as Sunderland. And that's the beauty of this Premier League season, right? How competitive it is. Even though these newly promoted teams have obviously had worse transfer windows than the bigger teams in terms of money spent, they really are competing with them. And yeah, it just shows from the fact that I picked Leeds to beat Spurs and Sunderland to beat Manchester United 2-1 at Old Trafford on Saturday. And then the blockbuster game of the weekend. It's Chelsea taking on Liverpool at Stamford Bridge. And this is a really exciting matchup here. Of course, Liverpool have picked up a bit of a worse run of form recently. They lost on Tuesday against Galatasaray. but there's not really any shame in that, in my opinion, since going to Galatasaray away is a really, really tough game, and they will have had a few days to recoup and get their thoughts together. So I don't think that that will affect them too much going into this game against Chelsea. If anything, if they have the right mentality, which of course we know that the Liverpool players have, they will it will affect them positively, I think, because they will be a bit annoyed and have extra intensity going into this matchup. And Chelsea, however, of course, they won the Jose Mourinho derby when they faced Benfica in the week in the Champions League. Of course, a good result, but is it that impressive to beat Benfica at home? Not really, if we're going to be honest, by Chelsea standards at least. And the result last round in the Premier League against Brighton left a lot to wish. So even though these games often are quite tight, I would predict a solid Liverpool win here, and I think they can do it by a couple of goals as well. So I'm going to go ahead and say a 3-1 Liverpool win on Saturday. And then heading into the Sunday, we start off with Aston Villa taking on Burnley at home. And of course, Aston Villa managed to get their first win of the season in the Premier League, that is, of course, against Fulham last week. Pretty decent performance, although it's hard to say if that was a good performance on Villa or just Fulham being really poor, or maybe a bit of both. But I do think that they have to try and build on this. And Burnley, as we know, not the best of runs of forms. Obviously, their defense is quite decent often, even though they lost 5-1 to City last week. Most people will have a similar scoreline, so that's not too weird. But I expect this to be a quite tight game. However, I would favor Aston Villa. Like I mentioned, Unai Emery has to try and build on the form that he has picked up here. So my prediction would be a 2-1 Aston Villa win. Up next, we have a really tough game to call, but it's a very interesting one. Everton taking on Crystal Palace at home. And if you do know how this game is going, I'm very impressed because I can't say that I do. Obviously, Crystal Palace picked up a 2-1 win against Liverpool last week that I predicted, actually. Very proud of that one. But will they be able to do the same against the other team from Liverpool when traveling away to Goodison Park? I'm not too sure. To go to Goodison Park and win is a lot easier said than done. However, I think that Crystal Palace's playing style is very well suited to play teams like Everton that sit back a bit and but don't mind having some of the ball. Whereas Crystal Palace and Oliver Glasner, as we all know, they like to go on the counter and don't mind to give the opposition a bit of the possession. So my prediction would have to be a Crystal Palace win. I'm expecting this to be a very, very tight game. Of course, as we know, Everton are often very defensively solid, and Palace as well, of course, don't concede that many goals. So my prediction would actually be a 1-0 Palace away win. Moving on then, we have Newcastle United playing Nottingham Forest at home. And this is also quite an interesting game that isn't too easy to call. I think most people, including the betting odds, will favor Newcastle, and of course, you have to when they play at St James's Park. As I mentioned last week, when they have that crowd in the back, it really acts as the 12th man. But it wasn't enough against Arsenal. And are Nottingham Forest as good as Arsenal? No, they are obviously not. But I don't think that they're far enough from them to not make this game competitive. And I actually find this game really hard to call, even though, as I mentioned, Newcastle are betting favorites here, and Nottingham Forest coming off that loss against Sunderland at home. Of course, that's not good. But Ash Postecoglou and his crazy style of football, maybe I'm speaking more with my heart than my brain here, but I don't expect him to do so poorly, and I do think that Newcastle have had a bit of luck in their recent games, to be honest. Of course, Livramento picked up an injury on his knee last time out against Arsenal, and I do think he's a significant player for Newcastle here, so that will affect them to some degree. But as we all know, Forest have a lot of injuries themselves, So, hard one to call. My prediction is a 1-1 draw. Moving on, we have Wolves taking on Brighton at home. Wolves, of course, managed to pick up a draw last week out against Tottenham. Very impressive performance, even though they conceded a very late goal, close to winning that game at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And Brighton, a team that I've been really, really impressed by this season. And as I mentioned, I predicted them to beat Chelsea last week, which of course they did. And do I think that they win this week as well against Wolves? Yeah, honestly do. I think that the levels are just too big, even though Wolves will have a bit of wind in their back going in at the Molineux as well now with the fans there. But I don't think that's enough, quite frankly, to beat such a good team as Brighton. So I would predict a 3-1 Brighton win on Sunday. And then lastly, Brentford taking on Manchester City at home. And as we all know, Brentford managed to beat Manchester United last week, dominating them, winning 3-1. And Manchester City are leaps and bounds better than Manchester United. But are they good enough to go to the G6 Stadium and claim a win here? I'm not totally convinced. Brentford are one of Manchester City's boogie teams, and their playing style really suits playing teams with high possession as Manchester City. Brentford are relaxed, sitting back, and quite happy to go on the counter. And I do expect Brentford to give Manchester City a lot of problems. However, the class difference is huge, as we all are aware of. But I would not be surprised at all if we see Brentford put a few goals between the sticks of Donnarumma on Sunday. Tough game to predict here, even though Manchester City obviously are the huge betting favorites. But I'm gonna go bold and predict a 2-1 Brentford win. So those are my final thoughts and predictions for the upcoming game week 7 of the Premier League. As I mentioned, keep an eye out for Leeds against Tottenham, where I think Leeds will actually be able to do something. Sunderland, who will beat Manchester United away. And of course, the big game on the Saturday with Chelsea taking on Liverpool in what will hopefully be another classic. So thank you guys a lot for listening, and I'll catch you guys next week.